Donald Trump brands Vladimir Putin absolutely crazy after Russia launched its largest aerial attack on Ukraine. The Kremlin is downplaying Trump's remarks, describing them as emotional overload. But is the US president emboldening Putin, or will Trump's fiery words be put into action with sanctions? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. This week, Russia launched its largest drone and missile attack on Ukraine since the war began 3 years ago. But among the missiles came a war of words. US President Donald Trump lashed out at Russian President Vladimir Putin on social media, and he criticised Volodymyr Zelenskyy's public rhetoric after the Ukrainian president condemned what he called the silence of America. Not even former US President Joe Biden was spared. Trump stated, "This is Zelenskyy's, Putin's and Biden's war, not Trump's." So was that a warning that the US may be ready to walk away from talks on a ceasefire? And is a decision by Ukraine's allies to scrap range restrictions on arms sent to Kyiv a dangerous move? We'll put those questions to our guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Hamza Mohammed.
President Donald Trump taking aim at his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. In a post on social media, Trump called Putin absolutely crazy after Moscow launched a wave of aerial attacks across Ukraine, killing at least a dozen people.
I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kyiv and other cities. I don't like it at all.
Russia said the attacks were directed at military targets and were a response to Ukrainian assaults on Russian civilian targets. Moscow said the American president was getting over-emotional.
This is a very crucial moment, which is associated with the emotional overload of everyone and with emotional reactions.
It's a rare public condemnation from Trump, who has long maintained close ties with Putin. The two leaders even spoke for 2 hours last week, discussing a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. Both have praised their personal relationship, despite Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Washington's role as Kyiv's top military supporter.
You see the hatred he's got for Putin.
Trump also lashed out at Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, accusing him of worsening the conflict with his public statements. In Berlin, the latest Russian strikes have led to a major policy shift. Germany says it will no longer restrict how far Ukrainian forces can fire German-made weapons, clearing the way for Kyiv to target sites deep inside Russia.
There are no longer any range restrictions on weapons delivered to Ukraine, neither from the British, nor from the French, nor from us, nor from the Americans. This means that Ukraine can now also defend itself by, for example, attacking military positions in Russia.
As the rhetoric escalates and the weapons gain longer reach, the stakes in Ukraine are rising fast, raising fears the hostilities between Russia and the West could intensify. Hamza Mohammed, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
All right, let's bring in our guests for today's discussion. Joining us from Geneva is Mark Storella, former US ambassador who served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the first Trump administration. In Perth, Australia, is Alexey Muraviev, an Associate Professor of National Security and Strategic Studies at Curtin University. And from Berlin, we're joined by Aaron Gash-Bonnet, a Senior Fellow at the Democratic Strategy Initiative, a political think tank. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all. Mark, let's start with you. What was President Trump doing, using such undiplomatic language as "what the hell happened to Putin," and saying in such a public social media forum that Vladimir Putin is crazy?
Adrian, it's remarkable, and it's Trump classic. Donald Trump approaches these relationships in a way that is similar to what's happened in the past, trying to get a reset with Russia, trying to reestablish a relationship with Russia. But his spin is really different. This is not the reset of the Obama administration. It's very personal. He's trying to base it on his personal relationship with Vladimir Putin. And that's risky business, frankly. Vladimir Putin does not approach these issues based on personal and emotional considerations. He's a trained KGB agent. He looks at these things very coldly, and he looks at relationships as things to be manipulated. So I think we see that Donald Trump, for instance, with Kim Jong-un, tried to establish some kind of love letter relationship, extraordinary thing to do. And frankly, it backfired because most other countries are pursuing their interests based on their interests, not based on relationships. That's where I think Donald Trump got himself into trouble now, and he's scrambling to get out.
So Mark, how will Trump feel about the Kremlin calling him emotional? I mean, what even does emotional overload mean?
Well, I think it's really telling. Peskov's words show that the Russians are not approaching these issues from an emotional perspective, and they don't know why Trump is doing so. But I think what we should see here is that Vladimir Putin is trying to push the issue on the battlefield. He really doesn't want to be forced into a ceasefire. And that has been Trump's objective all along, to get to a ceasefire. So now I think Putin is thinking, how far can we push this? He's actually testing the waters. So I think Trump is being tested right now, and we'll really learn a lot when we see how he finally reacts. Will he indeed impose sanctions, as your reporter asked? That's the most fundamental question.
Alexey, what was the Kremlin doing when it said that President Trump was suffering emotional overload? Was that an insult?
Well, I'm not sure that it was designed to be an insult. I think it was intended to leave some breathing space for Trump to effectively calm down and perhaps issue a different statement, because Trump has the history of saying something emotional, and the following day or a couple of days later, he would come back with a slightly different interpretation of the events, sometimes completely at the other end of the spectrum. I certainly do agree with Mark that Trump approaches this from a very personal chemistry perspective. Putin does the same, but does the same in a very measured way. So vis-a-vis his personal might, certainly in Russia, trust and personal chemistry is really important. I think same applies with regards to his relations with China's Xi Jinping. With Trump, it's slightly different. I think there is definitely a degree of personal connection between Putin and Trump, and certainly the Russians value that connection. But the Russians also make it very clear and make it quite public. They understand that Trump will not be there forever. They'll calculate long term, and they trying to project what is going to be the approach of the United States beyond the second term of Donald Trump in the office. And that's what really drives their thinking. And that's what also drives, I think, Putin thinking towards Trump and the way how he does business with him.
Aaron, the two leaders had a 2-hour phone call last week, which Trump said he thought had gone very well. And then he said that Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiations towards a ceasefire and an end to the war. We know how that went. Is Trump losing patience, do you think, with Putin?
I think it's very hard to say, actually. I think that that certainly might be the case. I think that Trump is finding out really quickly just how Putin tends to behave with everybody. He makes all kinds of promises, all kinds of rhetoric, which Trump has a history of taking at face value, possibly really due to that personal relationship that has been highlighted before. But Putin's objective in Ukraine is very clear. It has been clear this whole time. He is looking to occupy all of Ukraine. He doesn't believe that Ukraine has the right to exist as an independent sovereign state. I think perhaps that Trump has been assuming that Putin has a different sort of objective than he actually has. But Putin's objective has always been clear. And Trump may actually be perhaps starting to see some evidence of that, which may explain some of his reactions here, in that he's discovering slowly that Putin's objectives are not necessarily the same as his own.
Mark, give us some insight from your perspective as a former diplomat. What's really going on, do you think, behind the scenes right now, in private? Could Trump be saying one thing in public, meant for public consumption, and a completely different thing in private discussions?
That absolutely could be the case. He also has people negotiating on his behalf, and we're not seeing very much of what those folks are doing. So it's very hard to say. On the other hand, one of the amazing things about Donald Trump is that he'll say almost anything right out loud. So it may be that what he has said is exactly what he was thinking at the time. And that's, I think, startling for a diplomat. I teach diplomacy, and we always train our students to be very controlled in what they do in a negotiation, to plan extensively, and never to do things unintentionally. If you're going to be angry because you intend to be angry. If you're going to offend, do it only because you intend to offend. I'm not sure you can say that Donald Trump is following those kinds of approaches.
Alexey, is President Putin playing a dangerous game? How long can he continue to openly defy President Trump, to agree one thing, or at least to appear to agree to one thing in a phone call with him, and then go on to do something very different, or to delay or prevaricate?
Yeah, I think.
Look, I think we need to establish definitions here on what exactly we understand Putin is trying to achieve. And we need to separate the Ukraine issue from the broader issue concerning Russia-US strategic relations. Vis-a-vis Ukraine, it may seem like Putin playing a dangerous game, and I fully agree that Putin has no interest in slowing down the military advance because his forces are on the move. Despite Ukraine's desperate attempts to hold on Russian offensive, Russia retains strategic initiative, and despite intensive bombardment of Ukrainian cities, we don't really see Ukrainians flogging recruitment officers and trying to enlist to defend the country. So there is definitely crisis of morale in Ukraine, and the Russians understand it. So the Russians are buying themselves time with a view to see the Ukrainian will to resist eventually cracking. But coming back to Putin's agenda, I think Putin doesn't just understand that particular element concerning battle space situation. He also understands that certainly with Donald Trump, there is a space for the Russians and the Americans to discuss, and the subsequent need for them to discuss much broader set of things, ranging from issues concerning strategic stability to other hotspots like the Middle East, Iran, North Korean nuclear program, the Arctic, cyber, space, and the list goes on. And I think Putin somehow understands, or at least assumes, that he thinks or have confidence that the Americans will not give up on trying to rebuild the strategic dialogue between the two nuclear superpowers because of the whole array of other matters they need to discuss. And that also gives him additional confidence of playing the hardball. And the final point is Putin knows, because Trump made it very clear, that if Washington will press Moscow too hard, it would only drive the Russians further into developing strategic rapprochement with China. And this is what Trump is trying to avoid by all means necessary, at least at this point in time.
Aaron, before I throw it back to you, I just want to get Mark's thoughts on that. Mark?
So I absolutely agree with what Alexey is saying. It's vitally important for us to look at this in the context of the whole array of relations between the two countries. I also think that in trying to assess how Trump is going to respond and how Vladimir Putin is assessing this, it's interesting to look at the lessons he got from his mentor, Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn said, always attack, never admit defeat, and always claim victory. It is possible that Trump, seeing that he has not been able to get this war done on the first day, he's not been able to get a ceasefire, he's not been able to get Putin to stop bombing the cities, he is going to, rather than lash out, retreat a bit and actually claim victory in some way and blame others.
Yeah, and blame who? President Zelensky, European leaders, Aaron?
Basically, anyone who can be blamed. And we're already seeing evidence of that with Trump's comments about, complaints about Zelensky's comments in particular. But yeah, I would not be surprised to eventually see rhetoric against Europe in particular, or European leaders ratcheted up quite a bit, especially because Europe has made it clear that this is a core security interest of theirs. They are, of course, waiting to see what Trump will do, and waiting for American leadership. That is a common European reflex, of course. But at the end of the day, European leaders do have a responsibility to their own continent's security in a way that Trump may believe that he doesn't, and he believes that he can simply retreat in many cases from Europe. And European leaders ultimately don't have that option. And if we start to see a parting of the ways between Trump and European leaders on the existential nature that Ukraine has for European security, then I would not be surprised to see exactly that at all, a blame game begin to start being played.
Alexey, is there any concern in Moscow at all that the US may impose further sanctions against Russia? Would further sanctions force any change at all in President Putin's behavior and attitude?
Well, the short answer is no. I mean, the Russians have been collecting successfully a whole array of sanctions, some 29,000 to believe some sources, since 2014. So I don't think another layer of sanctions would actually be a game changer in terms of changing their strategic behavior. And the Russians trying to put on a brave face, saying that, look, I mean, we lived through that, we've done that, we adjusted our circumstances, and we go by doing business the way we want. What obviously is not being shown, certainly in Russia, is probably the internal conversations that Putin is having with key tycoons, with key business people. Some reporting suggests that these negotiations do take place, and there are obviously people with vested interest in Russia to see not the imposition of additional sanctions, but the lifting some of the sanctions, and perhaps that's also part of the conversation that is taking place right now. But if anything, I think the West kind of reached the point when it really needs to start understanding that sanctions are not delivering the blow effect that everyone expected them to do back in 2022 or 2023. And I think the Russians understand that, plus their level of capacity to absorb damage, not only in human terms, but also in terms of revenue loss or something like that, is much higher in terms of resilience and in terms of relative immunity compared to the one that one would expect from, say, a Western country finding itself in similar circumstances.
Okay. Mark, how truthful is President Trump being when he says, echoing Vice President Vance, that we're more than open to walking away? It's Zelensky, Putin and Biden's war, not Trump's, he says. In that order, well, I find that quite interesting. To what extent is Trump caught between a rock and a hard place right now, in that he can't fully turn on Putin and blame him for the war, can he? Because that would be politically unpalatable.
Adrian, I think you're really putting your finger on the dilemma that Trump is now finding himself in. He would like to blame others, but he can't blame just Putin alone. Then he'll look weak for not taking some kind of action. He has to factor in the China question. How much more can he push Russia into Xi Jinping's hands? And I think you can't forget that. But the problem with this is that, frankly, this issue is one that doesn't go away. To paraphrase Muhammad Ali, you can run, but you can't hide. So he may try to blame others. He may try to say the United States is going to wash its hands of this, but actually the United States can't. It's too important an issue. It bears on the security of our allies, and ultimately it bears on our own security as well. I would also say that if Putin is able to do the kinds of things he wants to do with Ukraine, it's going to embolden China. And we know that Trump has a real fixation with China as well. And it could embolden them in terms of how they would treat Taiwan or aggressive moves in the South China Sea, where we have allies, the Philippines, Thailand, others. So Trump has to start seeing all these connections, and that's not going to make it easy for him to just walk away.
Aaron, was President Zelenskyy right to call out what he described as the silence of America following Russia's largest air bombardment since the war began? Or should he have remained diplomatically silent? After all, President Trump had already condemned Russia's in attacks. He was essentially pointing out the truth, wasn't he? That Putin talks peace but wages war. What's wrong with that?
I mean, I don't see any issue with what Zelenskyy said in terms of the actual truth. As you say, he is absolutely right. And I think that Zelenskyy was making these statements really to just put the spotlight on Russian hypocrisy. This kind of Russian hypocrisy is something that's very normal. It's something we've seen many times during the state of this war, where it talks a certain amount of rhetoric in terms of ceasefire or peace. It makes promises on certain things, and then it does what it wants anyway, and it attacks Ukraine anyway. We've seen this many times over the course of this particular war, and I think that Zelenskyy was likely making these comments to really point this out, and to also make it clear that this particular time wasn't like all of the other times that this has happened. It was, as was said at the beginning of this program, the worst attack that we have seen against Kyiv really since the war began. It was of an entirely different magnitude than what unfortunately has become business as usual for how Russia keeps attacking Ukraine over the course of this particular war.
And Alexey, just briefly, how will the scrapping of range limits on arms by Germany and other allies, arms sent to Kyiv, change Ukraine's ability to defend itself?
It might provide some tactical advantage. I don't think it will have any significant impact on the strategic circumstances of the battle space. If these longer range weapons are to be operationalized in Ukraine or over Russia, it would just be a matter of time before the Russians will find a counter cure and would eventually minimize the collateral effect of the deployment of longer range systems. That's what they demonstrated by countering the HIMARS, the other systems that the West was gradually building with the Ukrainian order of battle. So once again, we need to understand we're dealing with one of the world's largest and sophisticated military machines. An expectation that yet another attempt to find a wonder weapon would change the course of war. Well, perhaps that's something that could have been done in the early stages of the war, but not right now.
Okay. I'll come back to you in just a moment. Yeah, go on, Aaron.
Yeah, if I may add here, this is something, the scrapping of these limits is something that Ukraine has been requesting for a long time. The fact that this has finally happened, I mean, it's years too late already. So, as Alexey's been pointing out, the Russians have had plenty of time to anticipate the possibility of this, to adapt to this sort of thing. We're seeing another example here of the West's approach being too piecemeal, too incrementalist, too gradual, to really be able to hand Ukraine the necessary strategic advantage to be able to actually push for victory. So, I mean, it's just another example of this massively reactive approach that the West has been having the entire war. That goes for weapons, and that also goes as well for sanctions that we've been mentioning earlier. The question really here for the West is, are we lifting these limits? Are we threatening these sanctions because we want to constrain Russia's ability to wage war? Or are we doing this because we actually want to try to force Putin to the negotiating table? If their goal really is to get Putin to the negotiating table, the measures that the West needs to take need to be a lot stronger than what we're seeing, both on weapons and on sanctions.
Can you just very briefly elaborate on what you mean by stronger, though?
Well, I think that we are, for example, if we look at weapons, scrapping the range limits, that's been treated certainly as a big announcement in Germany, where I'm based, but we have not seen yet the promise to deliver, for example, Taurus long-range missiles, which has been a subject of public debate for a while here in Germany. I mean, that in and of itself would not, I believe, be a game changer, this sort of delivery, the Wunderwaffe, as been said. The other real game changer would be the West actually announcing that it was going to confiscate 300 billion of Russia's central bank reserves that have been frozen in the West since the beginning of this war. Just for context, it's about 450 billion or so dollars that every country in the world has provided to Ukraine in assistance since the war started. So 300 billion would be a big game changer. And saying that you're going to confiscate that would be that kind of big or announcement, or an example of one of the kinds of things that we would need to see for Putin to really get the message, the West is serious here. Until we see these kinds of things, Putin is going to have those questions about how serious the West is.
Aaron, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're rapidly running out of time. Mark, in his Truth Social post, Trump said of Putin, "I've always said that Putin wants all of Ukraine, not just a piece of it," and maybe that's proving to be right. Now, President Emmanuel Macron says that Trump is finally realizing that Putin has lied to him. Do you think that post on Truth Social is an indication of that? Is Trump finally realizing that perhaps he's been taken for a ride?
In a word, yes. I think that in a way it sounds pathetic. It's almost plaintive the way he's talking about Vladimir Putin. I don't think that Putin's objectives are different from what he's said they are, and that is to eliminate Ukraine as an independent country. And he's going to pursue that. I'd like to follow up on what Aaron said and say that the West and Ukraine can do more, and under the right circumstances, I think there can be sufficient pressure on Russia so that it could come around, but it's going to require concerted action. And we should recognize right away that if that happens, if there's a ceasefire, it will be tactical on Putin's part. He'll be playing the long game. Russians are chess grandmasters. They are playing 7, 8, 9, 10 moves ahead. And they will wait out Donald Trump, or they will wait out the circumstances and hope that they can get a better situation for them to advance on their grand objectives later.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it. Many thanks indeed for being with us. Mark Storella, Alexey Muraviev, and Aaron Burnett. And thanks to you for watching. You can see this program again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can join us at our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X, our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.